Okay, can everybody hear me?
No.
So welcome to this panel on the end of the article is just the beginning, the significance of online comments. So as I'm sure most of you know, online comments continue to be a big challenge for many news organizations. I like this quote that I recently read in a DigiDay article. Internet comments have long been a conundrum. Like communism, they're great on paper, but not so much in practice. So some of the questions we're going to address in this session are, what are the real advantages of opening up an article to reader feedback? How should comments be moderated? And how important is the creation of an active and motivated community? So we're here with a great selection of speakers. We have Jafar Abdel Karim, who's host of the Deutsche Welle interactive talk show Shabab Talk. Amanda Zamora.
Thank you, Matthew.
Amanda Zamora, who's senior engagement editor at ProPublica.
Oh.
Daniel Ha, who's CEO and co-founder of Discuss, a company that provides comment moderation software. And Matthew Ingram, who's senior writer at GigaOM, where he covers media and technology.
We got a fan base. Relatives.
So last year, I wrote a report for the World Association of Newspapers on online commenting. And we interviewed social media editors and managers of more than 100 publications across 63 countries, trying to understand how they do online comment moderation and how they use comments with the goal of producing a series of best practices. So just a few of the things we found were that an average of 11% of comments were deleted. Politics articles attract the most comments, the best comments, and the worst comments. And there was no consensus on whether you should pre or post moderate your site. But the thing that struck me most about talking to all these people was the contrast between the editors who were really enthusiastic about comments, really enthusiastic about bringing their readers into the conversation, adding to the story, and those who found comments are sort of highly stressful, depressing, and essentially a necessary evil. So they were very much divided into two camps. So I want to start by asking Amanda, which camp are you in? Could you tell us a bit about how comment moderation works at ProPublica and what you think is significant about this debate?
Sure. I would say that I am in the camp of positivity and that comments or actually conversation and community can really add to your journalistic endeavors and create a sense of community and a place that your readers hopefully feel like they can engage with each other and with you and give them reason to come back to your site, consume your journalism. So on the other side of that, I understand and appreciate some of the concerns and the challenges that journalists have when it comes to managing comments. And I guess what I would propose is that we could, instead of thinking strictly about comments as posts by readers, whether they're regular visitors or flyby commenters on the bottom of articles, that we be more imaginative and creative about conversation and community. That I almost want to ban the word comment. A comment is one way of describing what we're really going for, which is places for constructive dialogue between our readers, with our journalists. And so I want to offer three things to think about in terms of how we could be a little bit more creative and have fun in generating conversation with our readers. The first thing that I want to kind of put out there is design, and how important design is actually not just in the aesthetics of how comments or conversation look or feel on your site, but in UX and sort of, if you're trying to elevate conversation and discourse on your site, think about what it is that you're hoping readers will contribute and design a space for them to do that thing. So I tweeted out a few links of these examples that I'm going to talk about. So if you follow the hashtag, you should be able to find them, and I'm Amzam on Twitter. But the first one is something that we tried at the Washington Post when I was on the national desk there, which is called the Make Your Case template. And we used, I think Echo at the time was our comments platform. And instead of just using the default stream, what we did instead is, and Washington Post, as many of you know, our bread and butter was political coverage. And so how could we take the rancor of politics commentary on the site and elevate it? Well, we took a risk, and at first I wasn't really sure how it would go. We said, let's ask people specifically where they fall on an issue, yes, no, this way or that way. And you might think intuitively, well, you're just adding to the division, you're adding to this sense of division and combativeness in the comments, but what we did instead is ask people where do they stand on an issue. The example I think that I tweeted out was on surveillance, and not surprisingly, 85% of people said they did not think that government surveillance was a good thing. But before they commented, they said, yes or no, I agree that that's a good idea, or I don't agree that that's a good idea. And then their comment was in substantiating that opinion. And so instead of, and I think what a lot of us see in comments is people tend to either A, comment having not read any of the story, you see that on our own sites or on Facebook or elsewhere, or they're commenting at other people in the comments and they're not really speaking to the substance of their case or their argument. And so what we saw was that people were making pretty substantive contributions, and that the second step, or the third step actually, so they voted yes, no, they made a comment, and then the third step, instead of nested replies, people were able to vote on the ideas of others, and the ideas that got the most votes were sort of popped to the top of the stream. So that's one, I think, creative, effective way to think differently about what comments are and how they might manifest themselves on your websites. The second link that you guys will find is about contextual comments. Again, when people are responding to something specific, a quote, a fact, a whatever, and not necessarily each other, they tend to ground their reactions or their opinions in more specific ways. And so that's another way to think about adding or elevating the level of discourse. And so the example I think that I tweeted out was Readerboard. It's a really interesting tool for allowing people to highlight pieces of an article and react either quickly with a label, and then go beyond that reaction and comment. And then the last thing that I would say is structure. We tend to think of comments simply as a person identified to a comment and not much else. And maybe the variable would be whether it's their real identity or not their real identity. And one thing that we've done at ProPublica with Discus, which we're going to be working to develop more across the site, but which I think is quite interesting, is using Discus actually to ask for data points about the people contributing the comments. So in our internships app, instead of just saying, tell us your opinion about this internship, tell us about you. You know, was your internship paid or not paid? What did you think about the overall quality of your internship? And then comment. So this idea of asking for additional data points to add context to people's contributions, I think is another interesting way to think about how to change the dynamic and not just assume that comments are only, person post in reverse chronological order.
Okay, great. Next, I'd like to hear a bit from Jafar. If you could tell us a bit about commenting at Deutsche Welle, and specifically, for you as a journalist, how useful do you find comments, and what do you see as their value?
Deutsche Welle, we are in 30 languages. TV is 4 languages, but print online is 30 languages, so it's a pretty challenge for us to be on all these different languages. We're addressing different cultures, different situations in every countries. That's why, for the time being, we're using comment tool Discuss. I think Daniel will talk about it later more. And we are using a pre-moderating online commenting. That means, like today, as an example, if you go to DW English and German language, you will see that English, there's a live blog about Ukraine, what's happening, and someone is moderating the online comment. That's on the one side. And on the other side, from the practical side, from my personal experiences, I'm a host of a TV talk show. It's an interactive talk show. Interactive means I live with the commenting thing. It's part of it. And I'm addressing socio-political topics where young Arabs meet with young Germans every week, and they discuss about different topics that they like to talk about, and they are very controversial topics, also part of it. So when I think about comments, I think about interaction. And when I think about interaction, I think about exchange. I think about a dialogue, about understanding, talking to each other. And that's, I think, today when I was preparing, I was saying, like Václavek said once, we cannot not communicate. And I think today we would say, like, we cannot not interact. And that's very important to have the comment inside of it. And Very important concerning the online commenting is it's a two-way communication. Like I'm a presenter in the studio, so through commenting, I can understand what my viewers, listeners, followers, whatever called, are saying and what is their input. And they really care for the input to be part of the talk show, because I can take their questions and add them to someone in the, from my guests to answer them. At the same time, I take from time to time maybe 1 hour where I say I'll be online and we're gonna talk together. Then I'm moderating this discussion to different topics. If not, I'm doing that, then there's a social media editor taking care of it. But I think we cannot live without the whole comment. It's part of it. It's cross media. I mean, no one should not allowed to not to comment.
And so Daniel, so your platform Discuss is used by about more than 3 million sites around the world. So I was wondering, why are all these publishers so keen to invest in online comments? What do you see as the value of online comments?
Value of comments. So Discuss, let me explain what it is real quick. So Discuss is a web discussion platform, online discussion platform. And our main product, since we started, is this embedded comment system. So my job is very much correlated to comments. Obviously, I'm pro comments there. But a lot of things that I've learned since starting Discuss and working on Discuss is that there's a lot to address with comments. And it's a tough business to be in, because there's a group of people who are very, very passionate about it. And then there's a group of folks who are either indifferent or they have a lot of reason to hate it. And you know, we talk a lot at Discuss about how to fix comments, and we realize that the issues that people talk about and the problems with quality and how people interact with that content, it can't be fixed with software, which is sort of an interesting thing because we have commenting software. But we realize that a lot of the things about online discussion, they're deeply rooted in very human factors. So if you want to create an online community, which I think the best comments feel like, you have to really think about the personality of the site, the environment of the comments. Amanda talked about the design and how people are interacting with that. You know, you have to think about guidelines, and you certainly have to think about leadership and moderation. And you know, I think you look at comments as a very broad word. You kind of see two sides to it. You have reactions and feedback, which, in my opinion, is some of the poor quality comments, because it's sort of just congratulatory or criticism or something that is very narrow, feels very like letters to the editor, old school feeling. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have something that feels a lot more like discussion. And to get that discussion, you need a lot of the interaction from journalists, and you need the moderators. And without that interaction, it would be like this panel without a moderator. It'd just be a bunch of people sitting up here being snarky and talking about themselves, and without someone to really drive that conversation forward. So, you know, we realize that where Discuss is strong is not going to be everywhere. At the end of the day, there is no one-size-fits-all. Some people will never use Discuss, and we agree with that. And some people who don't use Discuss, we also agree with that. And then there are also places where we think, when we are used, we're used exactly the way that we designed it to be used. And at the end of the day, that feels like a journalist, a community that is actually prompting its audience to respond and interacting with that community in a big way.
Okay, great. So moving on to Matthew. I mean, I know you've written a lot recently about online comments, and the debate over whether or not comments are necessary was revived after the Chicago Sun-Times decided to temporarily ban comments in response to what it described as negativity, racism, hate speech, and general trollish behaviors on its site. So several people have come out in support of this, and I saw a comment from Joshua Benton from the Neiman Lab on Twitter. He said, if all the world's comment sections below stories disappeared tomorrow, I'd bet 90% plus of readers wouldn't care. So I was wondering what your thoughts were on that statement and on news organizations banning comments altogether. Is it something that's ever justifiable?
I guess I like Josh a lot, and he has a lot of great things to say about new media. I would disagree with him, not that 90% of people wouldn't not care, but I would disagree that that means we should just get rid of comments. So the fact that readers might not notice or might not care that there were comments doesn't mean that they're not a valuable thing to do. To me, at least, one of the most fundamental changes in journalism is the change from the sort of broadcast pushing out one-way model to the two-way or multi-directional model. And comments and discussion and community and engagement are part of that. And if you don't want to participate in that, then to some extent it feels to me like you're trying to rewind the clock. You're trying to go back to the days when, you know, we as journalists just wrote things or produced things and then we pushed them out to people. And, you know, maybe you got a letter to the editor, maybe someone phoned the switchboard, but other than that, you took virtually zero feedback and zero criticism. And I think it's not easy to have readers right below your story tell you that you're wrong, or that you're stupid, or that you missed something, or that they have a perspective that's different than yours. But that is fundamentally valuable. And I think if you choose to give that up, you are choosing to give up something incredibly valuable. And you had better be sure that you are getting something as valuable in return. If you have a site that is devoted to a specific small group talking about a specific topic, and you want to make comments perhaps part of your membership layer, or you want to make it restricted to a specific group, then obviously that's your choice. My argument would be by excluding people from whatever topic it is, you run the risk of excluding someone who has a valuable point of view or perspective on the thing that you are discussing. And so I think before you make those decisions, you have to think very hard about why you are giving that up. Why are you willing to do away with that, or to sort of remove the chance that those people can discuss your content with you? Because fundamentally, I believe that comments with all the flame wars and trolls and spam and just horrible human behavior, I fundamentally believe that engaging with your audience, the people formerly known as the audience, produces better journalism.
And what's interesting is that comments or not, people are going to be talking about what you write somewhere online.
Exactly.
And that discussion is going to exist.
Exactly.
And
one of the arguments about not having comments is, which I think is fatally flawed, is, well, there's Twitter, or there's Facebook, or people have blogs, so they can comment there. So we don't have to have them on our site. And so what you're saying is people can go and comment about my stuff somewhere else, and I don't have to care.
it's like I can ignore it.
Exactly. It's easier to ignore. It's a lot harder to put up with criticism if it's right there beside your content. It's a lot easier to ignore if it's just somewhere off on some social network that you never pay attention to.
So I think if nothing else, you should think about comments as the tool and the ability to actually connect with that discussion that's going to exist invariably.
And it may not even be comments. I mean, Amanda was
Whatever it
talking about other ways of sort of interacting. Some people are, Quartz, for example, is experimenting with annotations, I think they call them, which are right next to, so you can post a comment on a specific part of a story, so they're not in some ghetto at the bottom of the story. There are all kinds of ways to design and structure that kind of interaction, but the fact that you have it, I think, is the important thing. How you do it or how you arrange it is up to you.
And beside that, I think I would go so far and say it's the users, viewers, listeners' right to comment, because we are trying to write something or to show something, and they have also the right to answer back and to know their point of view. And taking it even from a cultural point of view, maybe we're living, if I say in Italy and in Europe, you're living in a space where you can talk about most of the topics. But when you like talking about controversial topics and addressing the Arab countries, then people cannot talk about everything everywhere. And this place of commenting and getting in a dialogue, getting in an exchange with the author or with the moderator or the presenter, it's a space for them to express what they think. It's a small space for them to understand the other point of view, which is usually not being seen or not being accepted. And it just gives a very strong reason for the whole users and viewers and listeners to come back, to join you, to build a community, to feel even taken serious.
I would also just add that it's important also in terms of capturing the truth about a story. Certainly there is a line at which offensive comments are not tolerable and should not be tolerable. They're not acceptable. We did a pretty important and impressive, I think Nicole Hannah-Jones did a really terrific job reporting about the resegregation of schools in the United States, particularly in the South. And we had, I can't remember if we had this conversation before the story published or shortly after, but we got together and we had a conversation about what our strategy was going to be. Actually, it was after, I know, because we already had a bunch of comments in the queue that we were struggling with. Like, what do we do with these comments that are racist and offensive to us? How offensive are they to our readers? And the one thing that I had done in advance in anticipation of this sort of wave of comments was to at least turn on, to up the pre-moderation. Normally, our moderation is not that strict. We made everything prior review so that we could keep better tabs on what was going on before it went onto the site. I took particular pleasure in approving a comment about someone complaining that they were being censored. It's like, nope, approved. But Dick Toffel, as the president of ProPublica, he made a really good point in this conversation, which is it would be a disservice to our readers to whitewash the comments and to pretend as if there is not a contingent of people, even in the ProPublica readership or community, who don't have these racist viewpoints. That is part of the story. And so it really stuck with me, and yeah, it is a matter of free speech, and it's obviously there is a line that we need to negotiate in order to keep the conversation going and keep it constructive, but it's worth spending the time to grapple with those issues and not just sort of take the easy route and just say, I'm turning it all off, I'm just going to ignore what I don't want to see because it's ugly and it's hard.
And that's a great example. We had a story early on when we launched comments at the newspaper I used to work for. There was a story about a Jewish activist who had died, and within about 15 minutes there was an anti-Semitic comment that had been posted, and it was still very new. I think we were the first newspaper to have comments in North America, and so we were struggling with, well, do we delete it or should we leave it? It wasn't out and out anti-Semitic. It was like sort of cocktail party anti-Semitism, like why should we care more about this person than another person? And so during the time it took me to email the editor and say, what do you think we should do? 5 people had posted comments basically responding to this comment and telling this person that what they said was unacceptable. And I remember saying to my boss, that was actually better. To have that happen in public, in the comments, was actually better than if we had removed it and pretended that it never happened. And in some ways, by seeing that kind of activity happen, by seeing your readers do that, sort of self-police or moderate their own community, that actually helps you build your community. It strengthens the community.
But what comment would you delete, or what comment wouldn't you approve? Is there one comment, or is there something where you say that's the red line? No.
My default was to never delete a comment.
Okay.
But I was overruled many, many times. Obviously, sort of outrageously offensive speech in any context is, if you're a family newspaper or if you're a sort of general interest publication, is going to probably cross a bar. My problem with that is that it's a slippery slope. If you say, well, we don't want to have comments that are racist, then any story that involves the Middle East, you will never have, you'll just close comments by default. And I know many newspapers, including the New York Times, choose not to have comments on a whole range of stories where they could potentially get some valuable feedback because they just can't be bothered because it will take too much work, or it's going to be, one will slip through, and so you just keep redefining the line until eventually the only comments you have are on stories about ice cream or something, where there's no possibility for offensive commentary.
Do you have comments on all stories at ProPublica?
We do, and I think one sort of tripwire for us is personal attacks. Attacks against an individual or a community or blanket accusations. Those tend to be the ones that you're veering off topic anyway. You're not addressing the substance of the journalism or the story. You're attacking another person, and we tend to be very liberal with deleting those.
And you have a policy, right?
And we have on the site, the policy is a little bit more pro forma. In our Facebook community, they're much more fleshed out, and they're proactive too in terms of describing what we're trying to accomplish with the community, a level of dialogue, and a safe place for people to comment and contribute their points of view, in addition to examples of the things that we will ban, and personal attacks is pretty high on that list.
And that's a really important point. If you are going to have any kind of community, any kind of comments, and this was something we were very strict on when we launched them, you have to tell people what is expected of them. You have to tell them what you are going to do, and you have to tell them what you expect of them. Because if it's your community, I mean, you are helping to organize it. You know, it's just like having a party at your house. You say, these are the rules. No, you know, fill out the list. So say, this is the type of behavior we expect. This is the type of behavior we won't tolerate. And this is what you will get from us in return. And I think if you do that, and then you fulfill that people, you know, they will accept that bargain.
That's why Reddit is so successful. Each subreddit has its own distinct set of guidelines that the moderators are really militant about enforcing.
Sometimes upheld by the
sometimes
by the
too
community.
militant.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so you've got to know the rules of engagement before you, you know, take the plunge, or you won't be, your comments will be kicked out. I mean, you just won't be able to participate. And if you, I mean, in that sense, it's not like a news organization. You're trying to kind of create a space for a range, right, of people to be able to interact and have dialogue, but maybe thinking about distinct spaces within your site. I don't know, but I do think that Reddit is a really interesting model for how to kind of
That's a really good example.
It's also worth noting that you know, a lot of journalists and a lot of media organizations talk about how, well, we can't moderate or we can't have comments because it's too much work and we don't have time and we don't have money and we're trying to do serious journalism, we're busy and whatever. But if you have a community that you have helped sort of develop and you've worked with, they will do a lot of that work for you. And you can sort of deputize them in a way. That's exactly what Reddit has done. Moderators emerge from the community. Slashdot had a great track record for effectively promoting users and commenters to become moderators. You don't have to do it all yourself.
Yeah. To your point around people responding to the racist or the anti-Semitic comment, it's so much more powerful when you create this tone within your community where people are now just upholding those guidelines and reaffirming it every chance. And in my experience, when I look at some of the publishers or news organizations that have some of the most questionable comments, it's because they treat it as a wide open public space with no personality, with no set of guidelines or no tone. It's sort of like wandering into a open meeting area, a cafeteria, or an airport where no one really owns it.
Right.
So you kind of see trash over there, you kind of see people being loud over here. No one really cares because it's not their home.
And I think that's why it's important for journalists to be part of the comments around the things they write about. If it's something you're interested in, presumably you were, or you wouldn't have written it, then the onus is on you to be part of that community. And Neil Dash made a great comment in a blog post about how if your website is full of assholes, it's your fault. You know, yes, there are assholes. It's your fault for not modeling behavior properly in that community and not moderating those comments yourself and not being part of it.
But I think even if it's interesting to think about how to integrate the comments that you have maybe in your own, later the next writing you're going to do, because through the commenting you're understanding more and you're knowing more who you're addressing. We go far, we have restructuring at Deutsche Welle, and we even thought about entering the comments when the reporter is on the ground and he is in an interaction with the people or with the followers or the websites users, to enter this comment to be part of the TV documentary. Because the cross-mediality, so you reach there, so they feel like they're even part of the way you're doing your report on the ground. Their questions, their answer, their feedback is taken serious, and you can immediately integrate it. Concerning allowing all kind of speeches, I think we have some red lines on Facebook, anti-Semitic, and maybe when it gets personal, and the websites are pre-moderated, so There's nothing which is just immediate. I think it's a cost thing, and it's a lot of languages and a lot of time taking to do it. Although we wish that it would be
100% of the comments are pre-moderated on your sites?
Yes.
Wow.
And even
On the Deutsche Welle website, yes. On a Facebook, sure, no.
And even at our newspaper, we had a firm that moderated the worst. So we had an algorithm that tried to detect, obvious foul language, and then we had a firm that moderated the worst case, so the ones that got flagged. But there was also an expectation that writers would go in, although they mostly didn't. But there was a sort of expectation that they would go and read.
But I think you need to have also, to be very, very honest, you need to get the experience more and more. We didn't start long ago starting to have comments on the website. As I told, we are using Discuss. So you think you got to have the feeling to know who are your audience. On Facebook, it's working better, but on the private websites, on the official website, not yet. So I think with the time, we all have the ambition that it's going to be not maybe pre-moderated, but at the time being, it is pre-moderated.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the issue of anonymity in online commenting, which is another of the big debates in this area. And so there's a lot of news organizations who've decided that the trollish behavior comes mostly from from anonymous commenters, and so it's just not worth the trouble. And some have decided that they're only going to allow people to log in through Facebook, because that's a way to try and really verify someone's identity. So I wanted to actually first just ask Daniel, because I know that Discuss has done some research in this area, if you could explain that research and then maybe see what the others have to say about this.
We did some research a little time ago around the quality signals of the different ways that people express themselves online, at least on our platform. So the different types are people who are using their real names, which are verified by Facebook, people who are completely anonymous, where they're not leaving any information with our platform at all. And the last would be pseudonyms, which is most of the internet, where people are using online handles. The short of it is that the research showed the quality between people who are using pseudonyms and people who are using verified Facebook real names is basically non-existent. They were very much the same. And by quality signals, we look at a bunch of things from algorithmic detection of language, spam, people downvoting, people marking things and deleting them. We look at signals that would be perceived as negative for that community and also positive for that community. So it's the same between pseudonyms and real names. However, the volume for pseudonyms was significantly higher. So people are so much more comfortable when they get to control how they express themselves. And when I think about the sort of argument around anonymity and pseudonyms, I like to take it away from thinking about anonymous as an argument of people hiding and people trying to obscure something that is worth hiding. They're trying to put a bag over their head, and they're a dark, shadowy figure, and they're doing something perhaps illegal or controversial. Instead, I like to kind of root it down on why people actually use pseudonyms, and it's because they want to express themselves in a way that is true for what they're trying to say. And I analogize it to outfits. It's just like what you wear and where you go. There are places where I think using a real verified name is actually very important. Just like there are places where there's a dress code and you should wear a suit when you go inside. But I don't think the internet is a great place when that dress code is permeated to every single place that you could be. And I think that's the tough thing. With pseudonyms, like, it's easy to see that when you have the ability to control how you express yourself, you lift this burden that is attached to you, where you may have it in your professional career, your real life, your family, your friends. Those things are not, it's not just a defensive measure, but it also allows your head to think your mind to think very differently, because you don't have to worry about how it connects with a different part of yourself.
And I think I would certainly argue that by imposing a must-have real names or quote-unquote real names, or by giving that verification over to Facebook, you again restrict the available pool of commenters, and in some cases you may actually exclude potentially hugely valuable comments. When we had stories at the Globe and Mail about spousal abuse or sexual orientation, there were some people with incredibly relevant perspectives on those stories who would never have commented if we implemented Facebook comments or if we asked them for the real name. and we would have lost the ability to engage with people with an incredibly powerful personal story.
We're seeing the same thing at ProPublica. We do investigative journalism, and I'm thinking a lot about anonymity. One example, this group that I mentioned earlier, we have a Facebook group of more than 2,000 people that mostly on the patient side who are kind of discussing the issue of patient safety in conjunction with an investigation that we're doing. They know that we're doing an investigation. We've asked them to come to this group. It's an open group on Facebook. Anyone can join. Anyone can see that they're there. But they're there because they've been affected very directly and personally by some preventable medical error. And these stories are often horrendous. They're kind of really putting themselves out there, but that's the minority of people who would be willing to do that. And over 2 years, 2,000 is a decent-sized community. The number of people who are most active is much smaller, and for that long a period of time, it's actually not that big of a number. And I'm thinking about when this investigation comes to fruition, I know that the story is about 2 million instances every year of preventable medical errors and harm. Like, how can we create a bigger conversation to reflect that reality? I'm going to have to think about making it easier for people to contribute their experiences with a lower level of effort, and maybe not having to submit their names, because not everybody's comfortable sharing something so personal.
Yep.
So that's something that I think about a lot. We saw it in action, our internships investigation. These interns who've been unpaid don't want to have that attached to their career for the rest. They want to be able to speak honestly about an issue that they find important to them, but they don't want future employers to see that history online. And when we made it possible for them to contribute anonymously, they didn't have to have their real name with the discus comments, people started contributing more. So anonymity has a very important role, I think, in creating a conversation that reflects the reality of sticky issues sometimes.
I think there's also an issue with, particularly with handing your comments over to Facebook. Facebook is a proprietary platform controlled by a private company. You are effectively giving management to some extent of your relationship with your audience over to a third-party company. And I think if you're doing that, you should be very, very careful and very aware of the trade-off that you're making. If Facebook decides to change its policies about commenting, if it decides to change its API, your entire comment system could break. You could lose access to that data. I mean, you're effectively giving them control over an incredibly crucial part of your relationship with your own community.
But I think talking about Facebook, we even have some accounts, or I have the feeling from the viewers that I have, or people who write, that they have even a fake name on Facebook, especially on countries coming from, when I'm addressing a topic concerning a very controversial topic, one thing, and the second thing when I'm talking to Syrians, because they're really afraid of writing something that the government knows, and then they might be attacked, etc. So even on Facebook, anonymity is being used, and being being also part of them too. Sorry?
Sorry, as a workaround, like Facebook is not really encouraging that, but people have to kind of work around that.
And actually, Facebook's real name policy is a real sounding name policy. Yeah. So all they want is something, they don't check your birth certificate in most cases. Yeah. What they want is a name that sounds like a real name. Yeah. So if you have a stupid sounding handle, obviously they're going to flag it. But there are lots of people on there using real sounding names. It's not their real name.
And I think it should be a choice for the viewer listeners to be anonymous and to have the choice to say, no, I don't want to give my identity. And I would like to express, my opinion and to say what I think about the comments. And it's not because...
And I think we know, and then we were discussing before, even on Facebook you see horrible, horrible racist and sexist and offensive comments under people's supposedly real names. So the fact that there isn't anonymity is no cure for preventing sort of bad human behavior.
Who would have thought those people who are using handles to be assholes are actually really assholes?
Yeah, exactly.
They're okay with that.
And they're fine with that.
Can I just make a pitch also for, that's a good segue into, you don't have to only interact with your community on the internet. People behave so differently on the internet than they do in real life.
Yep.
Marshall Allen, who's the reporter on the patient safety story, has met several of the members of the Facebook community at different conferences and events, and he'll always come back. It helps, I mean, he gets to know these folks better. They're invested in his journalism, and he's appreciative, and I mean, it's just a great way of sort of realizing that relationship in real life. I can't recommend, especially if you're a local news organization, get out of your newsroom. I mean, this is like a fundamental of journalism. You don't want people reporting the story from the phone. If you can help it, get out and talk to people, see them face to face. The same goes for your readers, for your community. ProPublica just, and I was really sad that I couldn't be there last night, part of this segregation project. We thought about how we could engage the community in that project, and the story launched a few weeks ago, but back in October we were thinking, how can we involve the community? How can we incorporate them into the reporting? We went to Tuscaloosa, so we're based in New York. This is what I love about ProPublica. They said, sure, we don't report in Tuscaloosa. Go to Tuscaloosa. And we put cameras in the hands of 20 high school students and said, you tell us what race in education looks like from your perspective. And over many weeks, they documented the issue from their perspective. They shared these 6-word essays, and we didn't just rely on the story publishing and asking for these contributions after the fact. We worked with them, and when the story was done, we went back to the community and we had an event. Their photos are on exhibit at a local museum there. They were basically the nexus of a conversation that we created after the story launched, online, nationally, with our readers, but also within the community. And I really can't advocate any more strongly, I feel like, for also thinking about real life connections with your readers. I feel like they can be incredibly valuable.
And that's a great point, not just the real world part, but the engagement that you have with those people changes the way they behave towards you.
Totally.
So we found, I mean, in 15 years of doing comments and responding to readers, if someone will post a crappy comment attacking you about how you're an idiot and your story is wrong, and the minute you respond, they almost inevitably back off and say, sorry, maybe that came out wrong, or I didn't mean that to be as...
I didn't expect you to respond.
Right, I didn't expect you. What they're saying is, holy cow, I
You're
didn't
paying
really expect that
attention.
you would A, read it, B, respond.
Yeah.
And all that reinforced to me was comment sections at many mainstream media outlets are like you're having a party at your house and you invite a whole bunch of people and then you leave. Well, what happens to your house? If you can't even be bothered to stay and talk to the people at your own party, well, obviously they're going to trash your house.
But while talking now, what would you do if you have a shitstorm? Like it's like you wrote a very you think it's a good article, and then you have a big shitstorm. How would you act? Did you already have it? What's the situation? Because I have one, and would like to know what you did.
Tell us
You have
more
one?
about it.
No.
You have one right now?
No, not
Okay.
right now. I hope not. But I mean, I had one.
You have to wade into it.
Sorry?
You have to wade into the shit.
Yeah.
There is no cure for a shitstorm.
Yeah, but what did you have one, and how did you
Yes.
react? So
I've had a number. You just have
a
to
number.
You have to roll up your pants and put on your hip waders and your hazard suit and just get in there. You have to. You can't call someone and have them come in and clean your shitstorm. You have to go in there. It's not pleasant.
I think it's the same as like in real relationships.
Uh-oh.
I mean, sometimes shit happens,
Shit
but
happens.
if you see yourself with that person, we're not talking about anyone in particular, in the long run, you're invested in getting through the shit,
Right.
and
You have to do it.
you're gonna probably be more humble. You're probably gonna give a little. You're gonna be more receptive to their feelings, their perspective. I mean, these are real relationships. They're not just people that we turn on and off. They're not
Right.
just people. They're not just
To use.
page views or
They're
clicks.
not just page views.
If you
Those are
start,
actual human beings.
yeah, I think Dan Gilmore said earlier, and I think it was him, some other brilliant panelist said, remember that you're human, your readers are human. If you can empathize a little bit, let tempers kind of come down. And I also think the 10-second rule is really good.
Right. And the only thing
15.
I would say is what I used to tell the reporters at the newspaper was to be human but be the best version of yourself. Don't be the, late night, had a few too many drinks version of yourself. Don't be the sort of cranky, Monday morning version of yourself. Be sort of the best version and give people a little latitude. They had a bad day, maybe they lost someone, maybe they're going through something. Everyone is going through something. So, be a little bit charitable before you start calling them names in your comment section.
Thank you for explaining.
And so you've mentioned quotes and annotations, and you mentioned some things going on at the Washington Post, but I was wondering if there were any particularly exciting examples that anybody's seen of things that people are doing now that...
To me, by far the most exciting is what Gawker Media is doing. Gawker Media, which is based in New York, run by Nick Denton, sites like Gizmodo and Deadspin and Valleywag and so on. Their commenting platform, which they designed, is called Kinja, and it's about far more than just comments. They're trying to take comments and commenters and effectively turn them into contributors. So in much the same way, I think D-Correspondent, the Netherlands-based startup, is doing with their commenters. They think of their commenters as contributors. So not just people who come and read and post a little comment, but potential contributors, writers, people with valuable contributions to make. So Kinja, every time you comment on a blog at Gawker Media, you get a blog of your own, where your comments appear, but where you can also write regular blog posts. It turns every one of their commenters into a blogger. And they've already started taking commenters who've written valuable posts and given them profile on their own site, right alongside their own writers. That's a sort of fundamental, flipping of the traditional model. Nick Denton has always talked about how, when he was a journalist, the comments in the newsroom about the story were always way more interesting than the actual story. And so his whole life's work has been trying to get to a point where the discussion about the story is as important as the actual story.
Is it right that I think he said recently that if it worked correctly, then he'd rather just get rid of the editorial side and just have it all come from the Kinja.
He wants his reporters, his writers, to be in the comments, and for that to be the primary, content production system, not writing a story and then just shoving it out.
So here's the devil's advocate. I just want to know, I think about this when we ask for, the good thing about ProPublica, I think, is that we're flexible enough that we can kind of go to where our readers are, but we're increasingly asking a lot of readers in terms of what they have to do to contribute, and why should they have to create yet another profile on the Gawker sites versus be able to do it in a more lightweight way, or, I don't know, the same...
They don't have to.
Well, but if they want to contribute and be part of the conversation, they do, right? You have to create a Kinja account.
It happens whether just by commenting, all this stuff is created for you, whether you use it or not. So it's a historical record of your comments if you choose not to do anything else. It just happens automatically.
Okay, so it's like logging into any other comment system.
And they're actually trying to expand it as well so that it pulls in Twitter and Facebook and every other sort of form of blog commenting.
I guess where I'm going with that is potentially I feel like they're interested in it because they can monetize it, and to them the comments then become content, and where does the reader...
I think that's okay if they want to build a better business.
Well, and it's actually quite similar to what the Huffington Post did by giving people, you can come and write for free, we're fine with that, we'll use your stuff, and provided you see it as a trade-off.
People write comments because they want presence, and they have something to say, and they want that distribution and that voice to be heard.
And it's interesting to note that they're not the only ones. Even the Atlantic, I think the New Yorker, there's a writer at the Atlantic who used to be a commenter. I'm trying to remember his name now, but he posted such intelligent comments. They basically reached out to him and said, you seem really smart. Why don't you write for us?
Right. I like the blurring the lines between a panel participant, the commenter, and what ultimately becomes the panel leader, the moderator, who then prompts the questions and
Speaking
sets
of which,
the topic.
we should get some comments maybe
Yeah.
from the people formerly known as the audience.
So are there any questions?
Oh, no questions. We'll just keep talking.
Is there a microphone? Okay, the microphone's just coming. I can
Yeah.
see it there. So there's
So
these two here.
The balding man there near the end.
So and then
Online comment, please.
Online.
Yeah,
Finally.
there.
Yes, I'm the balding man. Thank you, Matthew Ingram. So I'm fascinated by the Gawker commenting system and the whole idea of annotations, and particularly as well what we've seen with Rap Genius as well coming through, providing a different format of annotations around articles and everything else on the web. And rather than just being kind of more participatory in some ways, does it change does the form change the actual kind of tenor of the comments in that you're commenting on a specific part of the article now, not the entirety? Do you think you're going to see significant changes in the nature of commenting when you see these new forms coming through, such as annotations?
I think we probably will. There's so many ways to, as Amanda was talking about, there's so many ways to incorporate engagement or community in your site. Annotations is one interesting way because you can attach it to a specific statement within the story, so you don't have to just go to the bottom and say, you're wrong. You can specifically point to something. Rap Genius is also, has everybody heard of Rap Genius, by the way? So, started as a way to annotate rap lyrics, and now they're annotating all sorts of text. That's fascinating as well, because you can attach a specific comment to something inside the thing, and maybe instead of just general rage in your comment at the bottom, you could actually be more specific about the thing that you think they got wrong. So maybe that will change the way people behave. Anyone?
Absolutely. I think, again, it comes down to, you called it design. I really think about it as environment, because sometimes you ever come across an article, I'll use an example. If you come across an article and there's comments there, but you realize there's 5 to 10 times as many comments on a place like Reddit, or way more comments on Twitter, it matters because people go into an environment recognizing other people and understand the guidelines and the tone that environment sets. So the way the product is presented, the way the comments are presented, whether it's annotations or comments at the bottom, it matters a lot to how people perceive their participation will be treated. And comments at the bottom is not a problem. It can be a problem, but it's also not a solution. So if you a lot of people have it at the bottom because it feels like a throwaway addendum, where it's like, here's the second tier afterthought piece, and it's more of that attitude to comments that makes that low quality than the fact that it's positionally below the article.
Yeah, I think it's the way you sort of communicate to your readers that their input is valuable. And so even the New York Times has started highlighting comments and moving them up alongside the story. That can actually have a huge sort of impact in signaling to people that these comments are valuable. So we didn't just hide them behind a tab that you have to click on. We chose these ones specifically. And that can actually help model behavior in your commenters and incentivize them to post smart comments, because then theirs might get elevated. That kind of cue can really change the way people think about what they're doing.
And there was another question.
Yep.
Yes. Hello, I'm Antonio, Italian journalist. Doing this question in English so that you don't have to put earphones. I work for TV, public TV, local public TV in Italy, Rai Television. So I'm probably more close to the guy of Deutsche Welle in terms of experience. What I see, especially on Facebook, is that I see a lot of people writing hate, writing bad stuff, just to be there and say, I'm here and I'm much better than you. You are just saying bullshit. You are the old television. I don't watch you. Of course, it's a minority, but it's a very loud minority.
Right.
We're about to go to social media with all our programs, and me and my editor-in-chief, we were discussing how to deal with those people. And I don't know how to answer this question. This is why I'm doing this question to you, whether you have to ban them, whether you have to cancel them and not ban them, whether you have to reply to them with the account of the media. I want you to discuss on this, if possible. One case, and then I leave you the panel. Last week, one of our viewers wrote us an email saying that he's a lawyer, so he said, "I'm ready to bring you to a judge because you deleted comments from me and you banned me, and you are kind of restricting my expressions of freedom." Of course, he was doing very hard comments. It was about war, it was about Ukraine, so it was a very tough discussion. How should we deal with all of this? How should we deal with all of this?
Wow, that's a really tough one.
Yeah, I think there is no one right answer. It's the experience you have. But Matthew said it before, if you try to have a way of a good communication, if you give the people that you're taking them serious and you allow them to talk, to communicate, to exchange, to have a dialogue, then the whole atmosphere on the website is different. So if you're talking about some comments that are really bad or really hard, as you say, or tough, here you have to define what's tough. Maybe according to RAI, it's not tough. Maybe according to Deutsche Welle, it's tough. So it's a thing that the editorial team has to decide, and we have guidelines, and right. According to these guidelines, we try to react. But like if there's something anti-Semitic and if there's something very offensive according to the guidelines, then we delete it. But I can tell you, I talked before about shitstorm, because when you address I address the Arabic countries. Deutsche Welle has 4 TV languages, and I'm working for the Arabic department. So we address the Arabic audience. And when you talk about topics maybe not simple, but for here it might be simple. Even when you talk about like something which is homosexuality, and you ask the people, how do you see homosexuality? Is it okay? Is it not bad? Give me your opinion. Then you have to count that you have like maybe 80% of them are very offensive, are even presenter offensive, taking to you directly. But here you have to count to 10, as Amanda said.
I would delete a bunch of those.
Yeah, and then you think like, what should you do? If you ban them, they will take it as a teasing you, like getting more attention. They would even going more and more. Yeah. So you think, what kind of comments did they say? How will I react? Take them, answer them. If it's really serious, answer them everyone a single from your account. What I do in this case, I take the questions and ask my guests and say, what do you think about that? So you can even try to moderate this discussion to ask other users. So you're having a bit distance. You say like, X is saying this, what do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? So the discussion is under them, and you have a way of dialogue between each of them.
I think you also have to tell them what you expect.
Yeah.
So what are the standards that you feel? And when someone crosses those, you have to say, not just delete it, but put a comment on there saying, this is inappropriate. What you have said breaches our standards. And if you continue saying it, we will either block or ban you. And that, flag, hopefully you can do it quickly enough before there's 80 comments. But if you can get that up there quickly enough, then when you block someone or ban them, well, you've said you were going to do that. You've specifically said this is inappropriate. And that sends a message. If you just disappear the comment or disappear the person, someone else will just come along and say the same thing.
Yeah.
Because
I was going to say similar. We do this more in the Facebook group than on our own site, but we will, if it is in clear violation, we don't hesitate in deleting. If we feel like if the conversation has it's noticeable, right, that it's been deleted, Marshall or one of us will acknowledge that we've deleted it and why. We also use that as a good excuse to reintroduce new members of the group to our guidelines. and we do that proactively too. It's not just when something goes wrong. We recognize that it's a growing community. People are constantly joining, and it's hard to find the guidelines and the way that Facebook designs their groups. And so we're trying to invite participation in a proactive way and remind people that there are some rules of the road. But the other thing I was going to say is that Marshall has done this a lot to his credit. He's just really, really invested in this community, and it's fantastic to see a reporter willing to kind of make the effort. He'll message someone, and
Privately?
I've done the same thing. You message them privately, directly, to explain the concerns that we have, to ask if they have concerns or if they don't understand something, and essentially warn them. And if they still persist, you have an obligation to the rest of your community actually to ban them, because they're bringing the entire community down. And
But the
Taking in
more-
a different direction.
But the
Yeah.
more obvious you can be, the better. I mean, the more you can, so I would not private message if you can help it, because then no one sees it. You have to be seen to be moderating, and you have to be seen to be part of the community, or your behavior will just seem arbitrary. So comments vanish, people vanish, things happen. The other people in that community, it's like God, suddenly a person just disappeared. Or, it seems so arbitrary. They don't understand. They can't see you behind the scenes.
I don't know. We do a combination. We also are careful not to seem like we're admonishing or talking down. I mean, you want to be able to acknowledge it publicly, but also have a private dialogue
Sure.
with someone.
Sure.
But what if you do it private? Then the others might not see it, and when
Right.
the others sees that you're doing it with them, then they learn. They say, okay, there are certain limits.
But no, that's
There's
a good point. You
clearness.
don't want to lecture
It's
people,
a
and you
both
don't want
and.
to.
I think that, we use
Not
both.
one or the other.
I wouldn't
Does that
use-
help?
Hi. Every day I do this for the place where I work. I'm the head of the web of an ancient newspaper, Italian one, called Il Secolo XIX. It means of the other seagull. So what I see is that when I decide to ban someone, I just say why. I tell them why, if they are racist, if they are offensive with the homosexual, or some other examples that you made. I would like to ask you something else, and to focus the attention on your colleagues or my colleagues, because many times I am the one that is there to moderate, but I need a more professional answer when the users, because we are always talking about very bad users, but there are many others that can give us very good ideas, and many of them are more informed than the journalists. So sometimes I can make an example. We talk a lot about sports, about the two most famous football teams of Genova. And I need an answer from the head of the sport or from some of my colleagues. And sometimes it's very hard to engage them, my colleagues, I mean. Do you have this kind of problems? Do you need, as I do, sometimes the effort to give to the audience a good answer?
Well, I've certainly had those problems for the last 15 years. I mean, I've had,
It's daily.
some people just don't see that as being part of their job. And so my response is to just, be as irritating as possible and continually remind them that it's part of their job. And, many will ignore you, but I think to some extent, it's a cultural problem. Journalists of a certain age just weren't used to getting feedback of any kind or engaging in any way. You just produce your thing and you shove it out the door and it shows up somewhere and you go home. That's your job. And so if that's the way you saw your job, you're probably not going to see it in a different way until a light bulb goes off, or maybe someone convinces you that there is value in doing it. I don't know how. I wish I had a solution. I wish I had a thing you could tell them you could tell them that their job depends on it, because I think it does. I think if you do not do that, you will likely be the first out the door. People who create an engaged relationship with their readership and their community are going to be the ones who succeed. So.
I would also maybe just add that I think incentivizing reporters playing to their vanity, frankly, and also the utility of it. A lot of our reporters have what we call them call-outs. They're surveys. We use Google Forms attached to their investigations, and they're not reporting in a daily way. So it's a little bit different. It's a smaller newsroom, and so they're not expecting anyway to be managing these things every day, day in and day out. So they kind of have a vested interest in maximizing the opportunity when they do have a big story launch. But I think that there are some takeaways there that could be applied to beat reporting as well. But if you have sort of a next step for people to take, put the URL of your story into Twitter. I wish you could do that with Facebook, but you can't. See how people are responding. What questions do they have? How can you interact with them? That's somebody that you're winning in terms of audience, a connection that you're making that could yield something for you later. If someone has an experience that relates to what you're reporting on, connect them to that survey. Give them a next step. Let them contribute in a more substantive way. You want to hear from them. I think those are a couple of ways that that our reporters know that they can take next steps with readers because it might help their actual reporting. So I feel like usually when journalists see how it can actually help them in some way, they're more inclined to do it. So trying to model success find the most willing people, make great examples of their success, and hopefully it catches on.
And I used to try to find a sort of evangelist, within the newsroom, someone who maybe wasn't convinced of the value, and then they had an experience where that value was proven. So a colleague of mine went to India to open the India Bureau, and brand new to the country, didn't know anyone, and her experience with readers through Twitter helped her do better stories, helped her find a photographer in a remote region, things that actually helped her do her job. She became the biggest salesperson for Twitter and social media ever. And I had tried, to convince her sort of rationally, but it wasn't until she had that experience. And then she went around telling everybody, she was a convert, so.
Are there any more questions? Okay. Up there.
Sure. Oh.
Okay.
Talk amongst yourselves.
The microphone's coming.
Where's his voice coming from?
This is a good photo op opportunity.
Yeah.
It better be good.
So we've talked about taking participation further for those who are highly engaged, right? Sending them surveys after they've left questions and that kind of thing. I'm really interested in the idea of how we can lower the barrier to participation and actually get participation in a meaningful way that doesn't require somebody to leave a comment. Like, I personally don't really leave comments ever. I'm an avid news consumer, but I don't participate like that. One of the things I do is upvote comments that I find are useful. We have a lot of smart people on the stage. I'm wondering if you guys have ideas about other ways that we can lower the barrier to participation besides the kind of standard upvote, downvote.
Wow, that's a really good
I
question.
think upvoting, downvoting is powerful. I think starting there is what I consider to be active listening. So there's a very small number of people who will actually go out and write meaningful, well-written out comments.
Probably 1% or less.
Absolutely, but they're the ones who are getting their opinions online. They're the ones that are sort of putting that story on that path and setting other people's opinions as well. So to the degree that you can capture some of that with more passive readers, the other 99%, the voting thing is powerful. It's just the binary response on whether or not you want to pile on or you want to distance yourself. So there's a lot of different ways of doing that, either the up or down, the thumbs. There's a lot of sort of survey-like results, but it ends up anything that kind of makes the readership feel active. So it's not just an audience listening to a panel, but it's a little bit more interactive, I think is key.
I think one thing that sites haven't really, and that includes ours, haven't really done a good job of is pulling conversation in from elsewhere. So it's fine to ask people to come to your site, log in with whatever, maybe a password they forgot, and comment, and then if your comment system is like ours, it deletes the comment for no reason because it's a Thursday or it's a full moon or something, and then the person oh crap, I'm out of time, or I've lost interest, or I forgot what I was going to say. And so if you can find places they already are, and they already have an account, or they're already logged in, whether it's Instagram or Snapchat or Twitter, there's so many platforms, and there's so much opportunity for finding them wherever they are and pulling that into the place around your story. Then they don't even have to do anything. They just have to comment, and maybe you grab it based on a hashtag or a keyword. I think we really need, part of the problem is companies like that, they don't make it easy maybe for their API to let you do that, and so you're constantly having to wrangle different.
I think you talk about like just curating all the social activity around
Yeah,
certain stories.
yeah. You guys do that?
I see a downside to some of that, and I can appreciate what you said as well. The downside to that is you lose a lot of, again, I come back to environments, you lose some of the environments that...
You lose some context, for sure.
You lose the context, but also the people that would be talking on Reddit or Hacker News or Instagram or Twitter, like they have a certain persona about them, and they're going to participate in a very certain way.
Definitely.
And when you kind of pull from different parts and it feels more like aggregation, it's my belief that you actually discourage folks from actually starting that conversation on your site.
I think you could, and I think you'd have to do it the right way. I mean, you couldn't just pull everything, obviously.
Absolutely.
You'd have to curate it to some extent, so then there's more work you have to do.
Yep.
But I do think that there's, the idea that to some extent, your comments on your own site are more valuable because they're right next to the content. But that doesn't mean people aren't saying things that are worthwhile elsewhere. It's just finding them.
I like the idea of mapping.
Yeah,
sort
finding
of like
the good ones.
Showing the pointer to where I can find
to
more
where it is,
conversation
right.
about it, yeah.
I would encourage you guys to take a look at the reader board thing that I sent out earlier. And if we were a daily news site, I would advocate using them more on our site. It kind of ties back to BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed has the labels at the top of their site, and once enough people hit the LOL button, a story becomes LOL-ish. We don't want LOL or OMG, or these are clearly not labels that ProPublica would want to use, but Reader Board makes it possible actually to come up with labels that make sense for the story. And so people can choose from, I think the default is 4. You can configure 4 different types of responses or reactions that make sense for the story. And what we saw in the experiment that we did actually was that it didn't decrease the number of comments. The people who wanted to comment were still commenting. These were different folks who wanted something that was required a little less effort. They weren't commenters, and they could do this thing without either registering their avatar or their persona in the same way that you might if you were a commenter. It was quicker to do. If they wanted to comment in addition, they could, but they didn't have to. And it's interesting, actually, to think about what you could do with those reactions in the aggregate. And this is something that I have thought might be interesting to try at ProPublica, is to collect those reactions over a series of stories about a certain topic and start to kind of create a visual representation of the responses that people have to the coverage or to the issue. Or there are a lot of creative things I feel like we could be doing to create more opportunities for people to participate without spending as much.
Do you see that some of the lighter weight interactions, does that start to feel like very snacky participation where...
if you lower the barrier too much, you're going to get a lot of shit. Let's face it.
Or you just get a
That
bunch of
didn't
numbers
happen, though,
where
with
it
us.
doesn't
Right.
It didn't happen.
You're not gonna get a
we
valuable-
chose good words. I don't know. I think that it depends. It's all about
Yeah.
design, and I don't know.
I might answer your question in a different way. Rather than lowering the barrier, increase the incentive.
Yeah.
So, and in fact, some of the stuff that Amanda was talking about, by connecting it to real input, not just post a crappy comment here, or hey, what do you think, which is what the laziest way of asking for input, but actually structure it in a way, so vote on this, and then please tell us why you voted that way, so that you're actually giving them more credit for thoughtfulness and the potential value of their input. Because if you just lower the barrier and say, oh, it'll be super fast to just leave a comment, then you're not really saying we want you to think about it and take some time and give us a valuable comment. So you might not wind up with what you actually want.
You really do get what you put in, because you can kind of see these stories, and everyone sees the little Facebook like buttons, and it says 3,000 next to it. I don't give a shit.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it doesn't really matter at that
point. And the value of a like is,
But you can even, what we do sometimes is like summing up of the comments. So people have the feeling their opinion is taken serious again, and they are part of our website. So they
Right.
It's interesting because some people, if you take the names and you put them, you see like the next time when you're talking about a definite topic, they come back and comment because they had the feeling, okay, you did something out of it, and my voice was also part of your
and
journalism.
I do think that the sort of highlighting that the New York Times does, and that I think Forbes writers are required to go into the comments and find a good comment and highlight it to bring it up and put it right beside the top of their story.
The top piece?
Yeah, so that actually forces you to A, read them, and B, try and think of why there's a good one, and maybe highlight it, and then that sends a signal to
Do you
readers.
guys use that within Discuss? We have a sort of
Do you have that?
sort of a featured comment, you sort of mark that.
We've played with it a little bit, yeah.
Okay.
I was going to say, too, to add to what you were saying earlier about curating and kind of pulling different things in, the other thing to consider is that what seems like more effort to me might not to another person. So to kind of imagine the target audience for that story, and if it's millennials and they're Snapchatting, maybe you want to try to collect, to be flexible, actually, and not feel like the responses all have to be always one way or in one space. So
That's a good point.
Okay, well, I think we're just about out of time, but I was wondering if we could just finish by you each giving you like one top piece of advice for how to go forward with online comments. If you could do that.
Do you want me to start?
Sure.
I guess, my advice is simple. You have to give something to get something. You have to be engaged in order to get any value. You can't just put a comment form at the bottom of your piece of content and expect people to take time and give you thoughtful, intellectual responses to your content. You have to be seen to be a part of that community in even a small way. I try to say even just things like thanks, or that's a good point. You don't have to go into great depth. All you're saying is, hey, thanks for showing up. Thanks for reading my thing. Thanks for having a thought. Thanks for not swearing at me, whatever. But any form of engagement is going to be beneficial.
My takeaway is that it can be hard work, and some of it just getting started is not very hard. But when people ask us what's the best way to get good comments and good participation, or really build a community, and I think the answer really comes down to one thing, which is you just have to care about it. And the difference between people who care about it and have built that with whatever software they use, whatever processes and whatever guidelines they use, as long as they care about that and they want that output, it's a world of difference between those who just kind of treat it as a table stakes must-have and they're just going to throw it on and see what happens, because that's where you welcome the trash.
Yeah, I would just echo what Matthew said, is you get out of it what you put in, and if you aren't having a good experience with your comments, to think about what you're contributing as an organization or as an individual to create a positive experience for your readers. And not just in sort of the day-to-day interactions, but also to be more imaginative and to think about, again, projects or stories and how you're trying to kind of build conversation, not just comments in volume, but conversation, and how to kind of think outside of the box in terms of how to achieve that.
For me, journalism is interaction, it's two-way communication, and see it as an opportunity to know more who you're addressing and who you're talking with. So it is part interaction, commenting, it's part of your daily life as a journalist.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you very much to the
thank you.
speakers.
And thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.